Good afternoon and welcome to this special session on subnational governments and methane action. My name's Libby Ferguson. I'm Director of Policy at the Climate Group, and we work directly with state and regional governments all around the world through the Under 2 Coalition to drive climate action fast. One of the big pieces of work that we've launched this week is a series of 2030 actions by states, provinces, and regions, really looking at the key actions that need to take place during the next decade to drive ambitious emissions reductions. And obviously, on the methane pavilion, we've been talking a lot about methane, and this is one of the key actions that we're looking at taking a bit more seriously in the Under 2 Coalition. We are hosting today a very intimate conversation with some of our state and regional and provincial actors. We're hoping we might also be joined by the Secretary of California, but there's a lot of stuff going on in the Blue Zone today, so we'll see how that goes. So it is my absolute pleasure now to hand over to our moderator, and I've got to get your title right. Daniel Taillant, who's Executive Director for the Centre of Human Rights and Environment, and he's being joined by one of really the leading lights in the Under 2 Coalition, by British Columbia, who have been doing a lot looking at the 2030 agenda in the last year, I believe. And we're delighted to be joined also by Jeremy Hewitt, Assistant Deputy Minister for Climate Change in British Columbia. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Libby. And thank you guys for coming today to the Methane Pavilion. It turned out to be the flavor of the month for the COP26. Everyone's talking methane. We're talking about a methane moment. And all the negotiators are over down the hall negotiating what we're going to do about methane. So my first question, and maybe the most important one for this panel, is why do we have a subnational government here? It's a local realm of politics and development, and yet extremely important for this conversation. Jeremy, tell us a little bit about British Columbia and why you guys decided to come to COP26.
Well, I think we wanted to come to COP26, and we've wanted to act ambitiously on methane for some time, and we figured out pretty quickly that it's a lot faster to do it at a subnational level rather than waiting for federal governments to act. In Canada now, we have a federal government that is fully committed to an ambitious climate agenda, including significant methane reductions, which is fantastic and makes it a lot easier for BC, British Columbia. But that hasn't always been the case and may not always be the case. So in BC, we've been acting on methane since 2008, whether that's from landfills. In 2010, we eliminated routine flaring from the oil and gas sector, and in agriculture as well. So, when we want to move, we don't necessarily want to wait for federal governments. And, you mentioned California. We've got a great partnership up and down the West Coast of the continent, BC, Washington, Oregon, and California. We call it the Pacific Coast Collaborative, and we've been taking significant action using the size of that partnership to really drive ambitious action.
Yeah, well, that's great to hear. And we've been talking about methane for a long time, and the world is just now waking up to the methane problem. And yet British Columbia, and I'm sorry California isn't here today, but you guys picked this up a while ago. And you've been talking about methane, you've been talking about black carbon and HFCs, and these are today the priorities that the world is taking up. And we're talking about a target now to reduce methane emissions by 30% by 2030. And states are asking, how do we do that? And you guys already have a plan. California has a plan in place as well. Secretary Ross was going to talk to us about agriculture and the methane digesters. How did you guys see this so early, and what are some of the lessons that you can offer to some of the states that have concerns? And one of them that we're hearing is with the agricultural sector, and that they fear that this might be a a challenge to their production, and another from oil and gas, which I know you guys have addressed, that also suggests that this is very costly, that it's going to lower their profit margins. What do we tell national governments around the world about the challenges to address methane?
Well, I guess you're right that I think you said the world is waking up to the importance of methane. I mean, we've been lucky in BC to have had a really ambitious climate agenda for about 15 years now. And of course, the focus of it initially was on the more kind of traditional emission sources. But we also have a virtually 100% clean electricity grid. So we couldn't do much more there to reduce emissions, so we quickly had to expand our scope and look at methane. So currently in BC we have in regulation, a requirement for a 45% reduction in the emissions of methane from the oil and gas sector by 2025. And we've just committed in our roadmap, which we just released 2 weeks ago, to a 75% reduction by 2030. On top of all of that is a goal to virtually eliminate all methane emissions across heavy industry by 2035. The focus in BC has been on the oil and gas sector, but what we're learning now is there's other sources as well. We have a big mining sector in BC, a lot of methane there, really tough to capture and address. So we set 2035 to give us time to be able to work with stakeholders in industry. I mean, in terms of what I tell other jurisdictions is a key principle for us has been to develop our approach in true partnership with Indigenous peoples, industry, and stakeholders. And so make sure we are developing regulations, policies, incentives that are actually going to work for industry and be implemented. The thing that I've really noticed over the past year is a real sea change in industry, though. So as an example, about 50% of emissions from large industry in the province are covered by or come from firms that have made a net zero commitment, at least by 2050 at the latest. Some have 2040, some even have 2030. So industry is now fully with us in this goal, and they want to work together with us to achieve it. So I mean, that's what I would say to other jurisdictions or other industry that's thinking about this now, is we've seen this coming together of industry and government, and it's yielding some great results.
So let's go there a little bit. I've been to a bunch of oil and gas sites around the world, and emissions are a problem. The oil and gas sector has venting emissions. It has leaky pipes. There are abandoned well sites all over the place. And I think this is common throughout countries that do have oil and gas production. What do you say to governments that today are not really cracking down on this? Should they be afraid of regulations? Can regulations help? You just mentioned that the oil and gas sector is working with you, and that's very encouraging, and I hope to see that in other countries. What do you tell governments like your own that have to do that hard step of regulating the sector? Is that regulatory framework going to work, and how do you get these companies to come on board and work with you to lower emissions?
It's a good question. I think what's really changed now is we're getting much better at measuring and actually finding where these sources of methane emissions are. So in 2008 we introduced a carbon tax, but it was not applied to upstream oil and gas methane leaks, et cetera, because we just didn't have a good way to quantify them. So that's why I'm so excited by the work that this group is doing, because I think industry was rightly saying, you can't address what you can't measure. And now that we're getting better at measuring, I think there's a real opportunity. The other thing I'd say, and maybe this is a bit sort of off message, but what we found out a bit of, candidly, as we worked to implement the 45% reduction, is we spent a lot of time not arguing, but discussing between different levels of government, industry, environmental organizations on what that percentage actually meant, what's the baseline we're comparing it against, And it really got us bogged down instead of focusing on what we really want to do, which is identify these leaks, end flaring, and obviously eliminate methane by 2035. And I see we have
Secretary Ross
here. Yeah,
that's okay.
I was
good that you made it. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah.
We're just talking about oil and gas, and
well, that's a small topic.
that's a tiny topic.
Yeah.
But it's so great that you could join us. What I had said at the beginning of the panel was that this is a big meeting about national governments negotiating a big treaty. Why are subnationals here? And I'm sure you got a lot to say about that, and we were waiting to discuss agriculture, and I'm really glad you made it. So welcome to our panel, welcome to COP, and we want to hear from California what you've been doing in agriculture on methane. It's the flavor of the COP. It looks like it's the big push that we're going to get, and I think we have a lot to learn from California and from British Columbia. So welcome, Secretary Ross.
I even have a mic for you.
So you've already covered oil and gas.
A bit. Not the whole thing. That would be a while.
We can go there, but we'd like to hear more about the agricultural sector.
So methane is something that we addressed in 2013. The state of California passed legislation that was signed into law to reduce our methane, our short-lived climate pollutants by 40%, but from 2013 levels by 2040. It was into three buckets: agriculture, specifically methane reductions, landfills, which are significant, and oil and gas. So I'm going to talk about dairy in particular.
Fantastic, because that's where I wanted to go.
And I would say, and I've been very honest with people that I've talked to so far this week, it's not like the dairy families were jumping up and down and going, oh goody, let's go down this pathway, because it's pretty intimidating and they felt pretty singled out. But what the state of California has that has really helped us with our climate smart agriculture programs is because of our cap and trade program, we actually have revenues to invest in the transition of our economy to carbon neutrality. And so significant commitments were made to the dairy families that if you walk down this path, knowing that by 2024, the California Air Resources Board will write regulations. So you can go voluntary, and we've got incentive dollars. And to date, we have spent over $300 million incentive dollars. We'll have $82 million over the next 2 years for dairy digesters and for alternative manure management practices. Because once the dairy families got on this pathway, they wanted to make sure all size dairies, regardless of how they farm, could participate. Right. So those are the programs that we have. We have raised, we only have a couple of developers, but they have been very committed to partnering with the dairy families. They have raised, of the $300 million that we put in as a state of California, they've raised over $490 million. Wow. Because a lot of these digesters are big projects. I have to tell you, my original goal was to turn all this cow poo into cow power in 18-wheelers, because if you've been in the Central Valley of California, the air quality is bad, and we have a parking lot of trucks going up and down 5 and 99. That used to be my goal until Friday. We opened, we cut the ribbon at Bar 20 Dairy for dairy digester to fuel cell to electricity, and one of the partners in this project is BMW because of their new 100% electric SUV, and this dairy will provide the offsets for 17,000 of those vehicles. Right. So that's sexy. It's very utilitarian to talk about cow power in trucks, but it's sexy to talk about cow power in BMWs. So that's just an example of what we're doing.
This is a great example, and I'd like to go a little bit deeper into it, because as we get together with countries like Uruguay and Brazil and Paraguay and Argentina, who are very heavy on dairy, they think the methane pledge is against them. They're saying that this is a way to take away their cows, take away their production, but it sounds like you guys are suggesting a different path, and I'd like to address that pushback that we're getting from the farmers. How have you dealt with that?
So in the beginning, it was you could use the dairy digester to generate electricity, and we have some set-asides through the Utility Commission because of our renewable portfolio standard. That's not economically as attractive to, you're a dairy person and you're running a utility.
Right.
And that's why the partners and the developers are key to this. You could also be part of renewable natural gas and piping it into the pipeline. But the real economic driver here is the low carbon fuel standard that we have in California. It immediately helps us with our air quality issues in California, so it helps us with attainment on the Clean Air Act, and it's making a significant reduction in methane emission reduction. And so thinking about turning a waste into a byproduct as a value stream, so the farmer's not just making a big investment, taking risk, there's a revenue scenario there that they can make a decision if that works for them or not.
I like this idea of waste being a byproduct and focusing on that. I'd like to ask one final question that might be a long answer, but I'd like to talk about environmental justice and disadvantaged communities. I know both of you guys have thought a lot about this. California has some leading legislation on environmental justice. What I'm hearing from a lot of groups, and I've worked on environmental justice for many years, is these communities in many cases are the most affected by emissions. We have a problem with our climate, which is we don't have a long time to fix this problem. We have about 8 or 9 years to address the short-lived climate pollutants, which you mentioned, which are black carbon, tropospheric ozone, methane, and HFCs. How do we prioritize climate, engage climate, do it fast, and also help disadvantaged communities?
So equity is a strong lens for us. It has to be, or we'll just keep recreating the pollution, the prejudice, and the poverty that these communities have borne a disproportionate share on. It makes me very sad. I've been engaged with the groups for a very long time. They believe that our program is actually inviting more and larger dairies, even though our cow numbers have gone down. Dairy is a very volatile business. And even though some of the better jobs in our rural communities are at cheese processing plants, those are all union jobs. It's a philosophical difference. And what matters is we have to listen and we have to make accommodations. You have to double line the lagoons. You have to have as close to zero emissions. That's why I'm so excited about the fuel cell, because it is zero emissions. We are doing, we're presenting the facts. We're doing our best on that. The developers are really focused on the job creation to build these things in those communities. And they got so excited about it after their first year of doing environmental justice engagement. They're also offering scholarships to the engineering school at the California State University, Bakersfield. But it still has not taken care of all those concerns. I get it. For so long, they've been the voices that haven't been heard, and I get that. But I don't know that I'm making. They're never going to love dairies.
Jeremy, you mentioned earlier the focus on indigenous communities. Tell us a little bit about how you incorporate environmental justice considerations in your policies and what it means for the Methane Pledge, what it means for addressing climate.
Sure, and just before I answer that, I'll just second the Secretary's comments about the importance of the low carbon fuel standard. So we have one as well. We adopted it alongside California, and in the roadmap we just released, we've announced we're going to have a 30% reduction in carbon intensity of our transportation fuels by 2030. So we've leapfrogged California, but we would sure love for you to catch up.
It's
because
good that you're competing. This is a good thing.
No, but we need a market the size of California to match us, so that's a challenge. Look, when I think of equity or affordability, what I have seen across certainly North America is when politicians are given a choice between affordability, equity, or climate, it's always this one that's going to win. It's always affordability, it's always economic, it's also jobs. So what we did very deliberately this time was put equity at the center of all of our policy design. And in fact, this goes for more than just the climate file in BC. So we do something called gender-based analysis plus, which is a fairly well-known evaluative framework to use in the policy space to really, to the best of our ability, ensure that the policies we're implementing do not disproportionately negatively impact our most vulnerable people. So that's across the space. In terms of how it's showing up in the climate plan, I mean, not specific to methane, but for example, we have a carbon tax in BC. We have significant rebates that go to low-income British Columbians because we know they spend a higher proportion of their energy on, or of their income on energy. So they get checks in the mail virtually on that. We are shifting our zero-emission vehicle incentives to be income tested. So we're not subsidizing someone who's doing quite well to go out and buy an expensive Tesla. Similarly, we've capped the purchase price at $55,000 for those incentives to be applied. So those are specific to areas not obviously involving methane, but I can assure you we're going to take the same approach when we think about
Fantastic.
methane as well.
So just the other day, I was at the Under 2 Coalition, their meeting, their assembly on subnational governments. California was there full force. You guys were, Cal EPA was there, Jared Blumenfeld and Wade Crowfoot of Natural Resources. Clearly, subnational governments play out and implement policies. Maybe you can tell our audience where those challenges are between federal policies and subnational policy, and how do we go from the national, which is being negotiated here, to implementation, which you guys are the experts on. What is your advice to subnational governments that might be listening and wondering how this global COP26, focusing on methane and short-lived pollutants, how does that play out at the local level, and how do they best engage with their federal governments?
Well, I kind of answered this question earlier, but my advice would be don't wait. And California and BC have a lot in common in terms of the role we play in our respective countries. And both California and BC have had political changes in government, but what hasn't changed is the commitment to climate action, which is really encouraging, right? That isn't the case federally, either in DC or in Ottawa. As I say now, I think it's fair to say that the federal governments in both jurisdictions have ambitious climate action, which is great. What California and BC were very successful in doing was charting a path forward, which federal governments actually have caught up to. And if you're a small subnational government like BC, we're about 5.2 million people, find like-minded partner jurisdictions, build that coalition and move, and that makes it very difficult for your federal government not to follow.
Right.
Yeah, we're like the living laboratories because
You are.
we can do it, and we're being more regional specific. And of course, we're very fortunate. You've already mentioned this. When you have 40 million people, we have a market that matters, and so we've already done that with clean air, clean water, our fuel standards, all those kinds of things. And I agree. Just there's no reason to wait. And you can build momentum by joining these kinds of coalitions and learning from one another and tailoring it a bit more to your own, your own state, your own situation.
Fantastic. So I'd like to quote your governor when he spoke in front of a wildfire that was behind him about a year ago, because you had more wildfires this season, unfortunately. And he called this the damn climate emergency. And he asked you and your colleagues to do more, to do it faster, and to do it better. Yesterday, I was having dinner with one of Greta's 17-year-olds who's fighting climate. And you know what she said to me? She says, yeah, I've been doing this for a while. She's 17. And I asked her, how would you sum up your feeling here at the COP? Give me a phrase that represents what you're feeling. And she just said one word, urgency. So you guys are the best in class. You're British Columbia and California. You've got to do more, which is hard because you've already done quite a bit. How do you do more? How do we address this in just 8 years that we have before we reach that tipping point? Where is the more? Where do we focus? Where do these subnational governments focus their energy, not in mid-century, but now?
You know, I think one of the most important things state government does, and I feel very fortunate that we have the California Air Resources Board. They've got great modeling. They've got great scientists. Giving the right policy signal that is also the right market signal makes a huge difference. And I think we've been fairly successful at doing that. And at the end of the day, businesses themselves, when you have to think, I'm in food and ag, when you're a brand and you have to think about sustainable sourcing for your brand, it drives tremendous change up and down the supply chain, which is really, really important. So that's one thing. One way to scale up is to remember the private sector partners and the people who have as much or more on the line than even a farmer does, because they have a full brand, a full scope of the supply chain. I think that's a really important point to remember.
Thank you, Secretary Ross. Jeremy.
Yeah, I fully agree. It is, or it can be hard to do more in a jurisdiction like BC or a jurisdiction like California. I mentioned, the 100% clean electricity grid. The marginal abatement cost of, climate action in BC is higher, I think, than any other jurisdiction in North America. So it is a challenge. Thankfully, we've got a government in BC that has had the courage to roll out the roadmap and frankly been very clear in saying, yep, this is going to make fossil fuels more expensive. It would not be a credible climate plan if it didn't. So let's just own that and start talking about the alternatives. In terms of where we can focus more on, I mean, we don't have a luxury of ignoring some areas and focusing on others, but it's kind of, it was almost like a leading question. Methane is a perfect place to focus on because we need to hit our
moment.
Yeah, we need to hit our 2030 targets.
Yeah.
These are short-lived, intense climate pollutants. So actually, if you look at the long-term value of what carbon emission or what CO2e unit you're going to reduce today, methane comes out extremely high.
I'm glad we're ending on that idea. Yeah. Methane is so important. We don't get to 1.5 degrees without methane.
That's right.
Right?
Yeah. Just to add another chapter, Bar 20 Dairy, their next investment is going to be their own hydrogen plant for all of their trucks.
Okay.
So it is a powerful substance, but it also has the power, the way what technology allows us and innovation allows us and investment allows us to do a lot of good.
All right.
I mean, I just got to tell you, that BMW is a beautiful SUV. I'm just saying. Cows are beautiful too.
I keep hearing from some sectors of the political world that this is extremism, that, climate change isn't real. I think that kind of has been left to the side. What do you tell people that still doubt that there is a damn climate emergency?
Well, in agriculture, I think you've seen a wholesale change across the United States because of how many extreme weather events and weather-related disasters we've had. We've had 100-year hurricanes 3 or 4 years in a row, or floods that are only supposed to happen every 500 years, every other year.
You're making up words about climate.
And so you don't have to say climate change.
Right.
Let's just talk about change that's happening. Let's talk about the payments that are being made from insurance companies.
Yeah.
Let's talk about losses of crops, that wind rain event in Iowa and Missouri. These are things that people know is changing, and we want to be able to continue to grow food. And so I think that's what's really driven it, is that people feel
the impact.
And they don't have to call it climate change.
Right.
They don't want to.
So maybe to close, one last idea that you would have to the negotiators, to people at COP. You've come from subnational governments. That's not the typical government that's here, but you guys have a lot to say. You are on the ground. It's where the rubber hits the road. It's where the climate impacts are happening. Why have you come here, and what is your message to these negotiators in this final stretch to the end of COP26?
Well, one of my messages, not just to the negotiators, but to other jurisdictions, and California is a perfect example, I think BC is too. Strong climate policy equals strong economic policy. So BC has led Canada in economic growth, job growth, almost by any economic metric. Our emissions have flatlined. We've got more to do. But with even the highest carbon tax in the continent, we are continuing to show strong economic growth. So I want to tell a story about how don't be afraid of moving forward. It's not an either-or question. You can and should do both.
I would here to that, because economic growth it's a very real outcome of focusing on this. The green economy, the green jobs, the green energy, everything green it produces real results for communities. Just do it in a way that no one gets left behind. We don't want to keep leaving the same people behind. That's a huge, huge, huge message. The other one for me is I'm so excited, and this is not methane, but it kind of is.
Okay.
Nature-based solutions. Farmers and ranchers solve problems every day, and they can lead on these solutions. And our dairy farmers are a perfect example. Going from the passage of SB 1383 with a, oh my God, what are they going to do to us, to like, we're helping to lead the way on solving problems and creating these byproducts that have other value streams for all of us. So we have to think multi-benefit and very integrated resource management, and it's very, very doable.
Thank you.
It's exciting. I wish
Yes,
I was
it
young. Then I could go out and have a great career.
Thank you both for joining us today at this panel, to be here at COP26, to represent some of the leaders that we have in the world on climate policy. You are helping lead. People are watching, and that's why we've invited you to this panel, because California and British Columbia are, in fact, best in class. We hope that you will do more, and we challenge you to do more, because there's still more to do. But we like what we're seeing in terms of the direction. Hopefully this COP will begin to change the rest of the world to start following some of these best examples. Hopefully our farmers can be part of the solution and not considered the problem. Hopefully we can cap our wells and really reduce emissions. I think you guys are helping to do that. So thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of the COP, and get out there and send your message.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Guys.